compound that by saying, Phil actually asked a very direct question of me regarding my recommendation on the use of it. And I said, you know, Phil, it's hard for me to answer that as the executive director. I can answer it better as a former director, long-term member of the board of directors. And I said, during that period of time, I actually was the chair of the finance committee in the period that David was mentioning. We had the 4 years, and the pool had to do a reassessment against its membership. And unfortunately, those reassessments tend to occur when the counties or when the jurisdictions are at their lowest. And so you put a mandatory obligation on top of it. Frankly, many of them, when we brought that forward, talked about whether they could actually continue to be members, that it may take all of their resource to be able to handle the reassessment. Well, fortunately, that's the good part about being a member of a joint organization that self-governs, because by doing that, the membership itself was able to put forward a repayment plan which was adequate to meet the needs of the pool and satisfactory to both the state risk manager and the state auditor, and yet at the same time acknowledge the needs of the counties to have some time to be able to make those payments and that were needed to cover the shortfall. So my comment back when he asked the question was, I just can't, in good judgment, at this particular point in time, recommend that we use some of the members' equity, some of the net assets, to apply against the increases that were forthcoming, because we just couldn't see the future well enough at that particular point in time. And each week, each month, it gets to become a little clearer and a little more promising at this particular point in time. Right? We're still not out of the picture worldwide. We're not out of the picture within the United States, and so let's let it continue to develop a little before we start using all of those quote reserve funds that we might have to be able to draw upon.
One of the issues, commissioners, that you may want to comment, I know coming back from the June meeting that you had some questions and concerns about dropping the coverage on the public records. So I don't know if you want to address any questions on that.
Part of that they already did in terms of the liability of releasing information. Do you have more guidance that's being developed for counties on how to protect against that? For example, if somebody used that information that they got through a public information request to find out when people weren't home to break into their house, or a stalker used it, or somebody else, they end up with some kind of damage claim or something coming forward. How do you deal with that aspect of the liability of releasing information?
Commissioner, there's no way of being able to forecast what might occur.
Right.
The Public Records Act itself, interestingly enough, has an immunity that is afforded to those who give information that they should have given. So it actually provides protection for providing information that later is found shouldn't have been provided. So giving the information is not as much of a problem as retaining, withholding the information. So the response that I would make is that's what David was mentioning in the past. Most of the expense that was incurred, most of the pool provided coverage kind of in a backdoor process. It got into it by providing advice to begin with. And then as the case would continue to develop and actually got formally filed, the attorney was already on board. It was basically say go ahead and defend it at that particular point in time. There really never was a statement of coverage until the year before. And we said, you know, let's clear this up. Let's not wait until we have a problem with our reinsurers or with the insurers. Let's clear it up in advance, and if they're going to take exception to it, they can take exception. And in the summer meeting a year ago, the annual meeting a year ago, the board of directors voted to specifically include it. But it was a problematic vote. It ended up a majority of one. There actually were 3 ballots in order to be able to get a true majority. And as a result, it's one of those things that's been kind of lingering. And the truth of the matter is the membership as a whole, or at least their representatives on the board of directors, struggled with that over the year. And when the vote came up this year, when the motion came up this year to strike it from coverage, we assumed that it was probably going to be another very, very close vote. It wasn't very close at all. I mean, we didn't have a show of hands. There was no way of being able to tell for certain because it was a voice vote. But it was probably in the neighborhood of 2-1, based upon the standpoint that it really is part of the administrative responsibility of government. It's not a tortious act. It's something, unfortunately, there's costs associated with it. If you're going to take a position of restraint on providing public records, then you're going to have to be able to defend that action, and the defense of that action can become very expensive. And if there's an award, if the court rules in favor of the party who's brought the action forward, that there was an inappropriate withholding, then not only is there a fine based upon the time period, the degree of responsibility for withholding, and the number of records that were withheld, but there likewise is the issue of attorney fees that come into play. And attorney fees are what usually add up to the most in that particular court. So the answer back is there really isn't any. We are working on a good training program for those who are designated as public records officers. Now, if you haven't designated in a written policy to the county at this point in time who those official parties are to submit records to, you should. I'm not going to suggest to you that it be one. The court recently in a Thurston County, the Supreme Court recently in a Thurston County case, concluded that counties were different than other forms of local government, that they are unique, there are multiple agents of the county, and therefore there are multiple public records officials. So in the absence of a written document regarding filing of public records adopted by the legislative authority, then any official of the county who is custodian of records is a public records agent. I would suggest to you to be a little more definitive than that, to put a statement together that says these are these records, and this party is responsible for the distribution of those records upon request, whomever that might be. You're probably going to have the county clerk and the county auditor and maybe the assessor and the treasurer given their records. Your clerk of the board is probably going to be a party in that accord.